Lucy had been given a small doll as a gift from her parents. The doll was given to them by an ancient great-aunt who had now passed away. Lucy was secretly unnerved by the doll, which had nasty black eyes that seemed to follow her around the room, and a cross expression on its face. Nevertheless, Lucy had to accept the doll, as she was well brought up and didn't want to upset her parents by informing them that she disliked it. The note that came with the doll said its name was Annabella, which seemed to suit her. Now Lucy was even more afraid. Now that the doll had a name, it seemed to make the doll just a little bit more human. And if it was even a little bit human, then what was it capable of? Lucy knew that it was just a doll, and it couldn't do anything to her. It was only a doll after all, and it was only up to her knee. To put her mind at rest, she put Annabella in the cupboard under the stairs, where she wouldn't have to see it. That night, when she was about to drift off, she heard a brief dragging noise, and finally, a scattering sound of footsteps. By then, Lucy was pinned to the bed in fear when she heard a voice say, "Lucy, I'm on the first step." But that was all she heard, because Lucy started to scream in terror. Lucy was so scared that she didn't sleep a wink that night, but stayed awake in her bed until the break of dawn, when her mother came to wake her. Lucy tried to explain what she had heard the night before, but she was just so tired. Her mother simply passed it off as nothing more than a dream, and Lucy began to think she was right. Lucy begged her parents to let her get rid of the doll, but they insisted that it had been the great-aunt's wish that it be left to Lucy. She reluctantly went to sleep that night, telling herself it had just been a dream. She checked the cupboard under the stairs, but found Annabella right where she had left her. That night, Lucy fought sleep but eventually succumbed to it. At 3:02 a.m., she woke up sweating and heard the voice again. "Lucy, I'm on the 5th step," it said. Then the scampering noise came to a stop, and all was silent for the rest of the night. The next day, Lucy told her 3 friends, Molly, Leah, and Luna, about the doll, but they just laughed in her face. Lucy worked out that Annabella was climbing 4 steps at a time, which meant there was only one more night until she reached the top. That night, Lucy decided to shut her bedroom door. Her mother noticed because Lucy normally kept her door slightly open to let the light from the hallway in. Lucy had always been afraid of the dark. She asked if she could keep her bedroom light on, but her mother said that the light would be far too bright and would keep her up at night, while Lucy knew she would stay up all night anyway. Because Lucy was more afraid of the doll than the dark, she closed the door and didn't turn on the light. Just as she began to doze off, Lucy heard a noise come from outside her bedroom door. "Lucy, I'm on the top step, Lucy," it said. Lucy was terrified now, her heart pounding inside her chest. She knew if she stayed in her bedroom, she wouldn't be safe. So she got up and planned to make a run toward her parents' room. After all, even if the doll got her, it was just a doll, right? She got out of bed, and with a tiny trembling hand, pulled the door open with a yank and started to run. When morning rose, her parents found her at the bottom of the stairs. There was a tiny body alongside Annabella. Her parents guessed that she had needed to use the bathroom in the night but didn't turn on the light, lost her footing, snapped her neck, and died instantly. Annabella was cuddled under Lucy's arm. In their grief, her parents thought Lucy had loved the doll very much. Since she had it with her when she perished, they decided to bury her with Annabella. Everybody said what a tragedy it was, especially how her great-aunt died in the same way. Just last week, my mom's favorite Vietnam doll from the 70s broke after falling off her shelf during a loud commotion. It was made out of a type of glass, like what a vase would be made of. She seemed somewhat negatively affected by it. I told her that I'd see what I could do to get it replaced. She told me the only reason it meant so much to her was because she'd had it ever since she was 7. She's never owned something that long. After I heard about the accident, she told me a garage sale was just up the street from her place, so I took a stroll there and checked out what they had. The garage sale was run by an old man and his wife. Most of what they were selling were movies from the 60s or children's books. Must be grandparents, I'd assumed. Nothing much caught my interest, except for this doll. It looked oddly similar to my mom's Vietnam doll. It was a bit bizarre. It had the long dark hair, the beautiful dark red dress, the little black slips, and even the pale white skin. But something felt off about it. The eyes were pitch black instead of baby blue. I tried not to overthink it and approached the old man. I asked him how much the doll was. He just laughed a little and said, "I remember that doll. It's a China doll. It used to belong to my granddaughter. Too bad she passed." I asked him what he meant. He told me, "My granddaughter was 16 when she died. She committed suicide. God only knows why she did it." I thought about it for a moment, then realized I never actually got an answer about the price. I asked again how much it was. He told me he wasn't even going to charge me for it. He just wanted it out of his sight. I replied with a soft, "Thank you," but I couldn't shake how strange and suspicious the old man seemed. When I arrived home, I showed my mom the doll. "It's perfect," she said, grinning. Ever since then, she hasn't said anything negative about the doll. All she said was that it looked exactly like hers, and I've noticed how attached she's become to it. Whenever I go over to her house, I find her in her rocking chair, rocking back and forth, staring into the doll's darkened eyes. It's a little creepy, so I took a break from visiting. Then I had a nightmare. The dream began in a well-lit room. I knew I was dreaming, but within it, I felt like I was uncovering something. Across from where I stood was a little girl. She looked eerily similar to the doll. I asked her what she wanted. She told me she was there to warn me about the horrors the doll carried. I asked her what she meant. She said the doll my mom now had was possessed by an evil spirit. That explained why my mom had been acting so strange lately. In the dream, I asked if I could destroy the doll. She said no. If I tried, the spirit could be released and would more easily find its way into my mother's body. It could possess her. The girl told me I should try to get rid of the doll somehow, but not by destroying it. Unfortunately, I didn't know what else to do. It was just a nightmare. God only knows if what she told me was even real. The day after that dream, strange things began to happen. My mom stopped answering my phone calls. She didn't call me back. Something was wrong, and I had to figure out what. I went over to her house. As I approached the door, I realized it was already open. What horrors could be inside? I dashed into her room. There she was, in the corner, shivering. She turned around and grinned. Something was terribly off. Her eyes were dark. I stumbled back. "What's wrong? You don't like how I look?" she said in a demonic voice. That's when I noticed the brutal cuts up and down her arms. What the hell is going on? I whispered to myself. I needed to see a priest before things got worse. I'd just spoken to a priest about what had been happening. The only problem was that I had to wait 5 days for him to arrive. He recently showed up. I held the door open and let him inside. We walked up the stairs as I explained everything. About my mom, about the doll. He simply asked, "Was it Avalina's doll?" I didn't know the name, so I asked him who Avalina was. He told me she'd been about 10 years old. She lived with her grandparents. One day, while roaming their attic for a spare light bulb, she found the China doll, the same one my mom now owned. Avalina named the doll Emily. After that, she noticed something wrong. The doll showed her things. Terrible things. She warned her grandparents, but they thought she was making it up. As punishment, they locked her in the cellar until she stopped talking about the doll. But she never did. Eventually, they bound her to a chair in the cellar and set her on fire. Her burnt body faded into the grass as they scattered her ashes in their yard. I knew something was off about that old couple. Now I knew why. After our talk, we approached my mother's room. She was curled up into a ball on her bed. Black fluid oozed from a deep cut in her back. The priest told me to wait outside, and I did. All I heard was chanting and screaming. I sat and waited, trying not to panic. About 30 minutes later, he brought me back into the room. He explained that the entity which had possessed my mom was the same one that had manipulated Avalina. To fix everything, the China doll had to be buried. I took the doll to an abandoned ranch not far from my mom's house. I buried it. Ever since then, everything's been fine. For about a week, my mom still talked about the China doll, about Emily. The strangest thing, a day after the spirit left my mom, the old couple's house, just up the road, burned down. They were still inside, sound asleep in their bed. Some people even said they saw a little girl nearby, with dark hair and a red dress. She looked almost exactly like the doll. To this day, I wonder, did her soul finally find peace? Or did a doorway open? One that can't be closed. My great-grandfather was always a quiet man. For a fellow who'd spent the first half of his life in the USSR, you'd expect him to have some stories. And maybe he did. He just never told any of them, except for one. Once, in the 1980s, when I was laid off, thanks Reagan, I picked up the side hobby of repairing antique dolls. My great-grandfather absolutely hated this, which made things incredibly difficult as I was caring for him at the time. One day I had finally had enough of his complaining. "Why?" I demanded. "What is it with you and dolls, Grandpa?" He took a deep breath and looked me in the eye. "You want to know why I hate those things so much?" "Yes," I pleaded. "Please tell me. I want to understand. I have kept silent for so long. But you want to know. So you shall." He then raised his hand and wagged his finger at me. "But I warn you, Dorogoy, you will wish you had not asked." The story my great-grandfather told me is as follows. When my great-grandfather was young, he served in the militia of a tiny village. From what I can gather, it was a relatively peaceful place. The occasional theft was all the militia really had to deal with. That is, until the incident with the doll maker. On the outskirts of the village lived a man who made dolls and other toys for a living. My great-grandfather described him as a friendly but odd man with a wife and 6 young daughters. He was, I guess, an eccentric, always trying to invent new kinds of toys and games for the village children. It sounds like he could never quite get it right, and some of his creations wound up being the stuff of nightmares. He would take parts from a doll and use them to make trains. He would take out dolls' eyes and fill their heads with brightly colored scarves that children could, in theory, pull out and play with. But none of his ideas really took off, as you might imagine. The doll maker became depressed. He grew increasingly despondent. Eventually he started wandering around the village, demanding that children take his toys and play with them. He would scream and cry if they didn't. The militia almost had to run him out of town. One day, as my great-grandfather was making his rounds through the village, he was approached by the doll-maker's wife. "Sir," she said, "you must help me. I don't know what to do about my husband. He frightens me." My great-grandfather couldn't help but smirk. "He seems to frighten a great many people," he said. "Most of them children. "You don't understand," said the woman, who apparently did not appreciate his attempt at humor. "Something is very wrong with him. He doesn't eat. He doesn't sleep. I have to force him to wash. And he goes about with a strange look in his eyes. He keeps muttering to himself, saying, 'Big and new. The children must have something big and new.' And the way he looks at me, and at the children, I fear he may do something terrible." My great-grandfather now took her very seriously. According to him, she was nearly in tears, trembling. "Is he violent toward you?" he asked. "No," she said, "but I fear he may become so." "Well," he said, "you go straight home and tell him that if he does not come to his senses and stop behaving in such a strange manner, the village watch will have to come and pay him a visit." As the story goes, the dollmaker's wife looked skeptical, but thanked my great-grandfather nonetheless and hurried back home. It was at this point in the telling of the story that my great-grandfather paused. I watched in awe as a tear formed in his eye and rolled halfway down his cheek before he wiped it away. Never before had I seen the man cry. It was quite some time before he resumed his tale. The doll-maker was almost never seen after that. He didn't come out to the village square like he normally did. It was clear that he hadn't left town, because the lights would be on in his home at night, but his shop never opened again. His wife and 6 daughters could still be seen in the village, running their daily errands, but even they disappeared after a while. Everyone assumed the dollmaker's wife had left him and taken the children. Other rumors began to swirl. Some people said the dollmaker went completely crazy. Others said he was praying to Satan for the return of his wife. No one knew for sure, and any attempt to make contact with him was met with a curt, "Go away. I'm busy." The villagers' curiosity about the dollmaker was just starting to die down, when suddenly, one day, he threw open his front door and ran from his home. He looked absolutely terrible. His skin was pale and stretched thin over his bones. Heavy bags sat beneath his sunken eyes. He looked like a walking corpse, yet the smile on his face could not have been bigger. With wide eyes and a croaking, hoarse voice, he ran through the streets shouting, "Matryoshka! Matryoshka!" He reached the village square where a crowd had gathered. There, he shouted to anyone within earshot, "Matryoshka, at last!" And then, according to my great-grandfather, the doll-maker fell to the ground and never moved again. It was confirmed soon afterward that the man had died. The task fell, of course, to the village militia to enter the man's home to determine exactly what had happened. My great-grandfather said the first thing that hit them, before they even went in, was the smell. He knew then that, whatever they were in for, it wasn't good. Still, nothing could have prepared them for what they found. Upon entering his workshop, several questions were answered at once. In case you didn't already know, Matryoshka refers to Russian nesting dolls that fit inside one another. The militia learned at once why this had been the doll-maker's last word, and they also knew what happened to the man's wife and daughters. For years, I worked as a nurse in a small mental hospital. Most of the people we got were voluntary, but on occasion a criminal who'd pleaded insane was charged. Being someone who grew up in a small town, I'd never seen any crazy people. The type that went straight into a white jacket and a padded cell. However, there is a reason I don't work in the hospital anymore. What happened now seems like an out-of-control horror story, the kind that made me check on my daughter every night until it happened. I can't say that anything has, or ever will, disturb me as much as that man. His name was Matthew Davis, but he was known in the papers as the Doll Man. Police led him in with his hands cuffed behind him. If you told me that man was a sick, twisted murderer, I never would have guessed. I couldn't imagine a more meek-looking person. He was aged, but in the way you'd expect someone who's always smiling to age, with deep smile lines and crow's feet. Sparse, mousy hair covered his head, a subtly hunched posture, an average frame. Of all his features, what stood out most were his eyes. They looked constantly wet, as if always on the verge of tears, which stood starkly out of place on the rest of him. Most of all, they showed he was never truly present, always staring slightly off into space, the portrait of a madman. But I hadn't known at the time what had led to his conviction. Then he said, to no one in particular, "Where's my daughter? Is my Lucy here?" I was still not convinced he was a cold-blooded killer, but I was told to escort him to one of our few padded rooms and have him put in a straitjacket. He didn't struggle once. All he did was stare blankly with those wet blue eyes. Well, I shouldn't say that was the only thing he did. He would talk to himself in a soft, quiet voice, full conversations with an imaginary person, presumably his daughter, about the color of the patch of sky he could see through his small window, or the things they could do when he came home. It saddened me, actually. There are few things in the world stronger than a parent's love. As I was about to close the cell door, he suddenly looked up. For the first time, I felt as if he were actually looking directly into me, so much so that it became uncomfortable after less than half a second. What chilled me even more was what he said afterward. "I loved her, you know, my dear sweet Lucy. She was the only thing I had. The poor child, she was so fragile and pale, like the porcelain dolls I used to make, and just as beautiful. However, one day, she broke. I gathered her pieces, clothed her in a new dress, gave her new eyes, and sat her up on a chair. She was still unhappy, so I made her smile again. I could tell she was lonely, so I made her doll friends to sit by her. I gathered their pieces, clothed them in new dresses, gave them new eyes, and sat them up on chairs. His momentary focus dissolved, and he went back to mumbling to himself. I went home that day with an unsettling heaviness over my heart. My first mistake was looking up his name on the computer. I was horrified. At least 100 hits must have come up. There were headlines everywhere, from reports of mysterious kidnappings involving local children to stories declaring serial killer the doll man caught. I didn't believe it at first. I couldn't. How could someone kidnap so many young girls without being caught? How could he murder all of them? Why? Little did I know, that was only the tip of the iceberg. Matthew Davis worked as a doll maker and lived with his only daughter, 7-year-old Lucy Davis. Lucy had a terminal illness and succumbed to it about 2 years before her father was detained. He was so distraught over her death that he denied it altogether. Instead, he cleaned up her corpse, dressed it, and set up a tea party in what Lucy had called the dollhouse, a room filled with shelves of dolls her father had made for her. He sewed up her lips so she smiled grotesquely. He gouged out her actual eyes and replaced them with glass ones. What's more, he continued to live as if she were still alive, feeding her, talking to her, tucking her into bed. And when pieces of her fell off, he sewed them back on. Still, it wasn't enough for Lucy. He believed she was lonely and wanted friends. To create these friends, he would lure young girls around the age of 6 to 8 with dolls, telling them he had many more they could play with in his house. From there, he took them into his basement and cut them up, only to sew them back together so they resembled his daughter's corpse. Dresses were made for them. He clothed them after cleaning the blood from their fake, implanted eyes and stitched up mouths. After his doll making, he'd simulate a tea party for them with his daughter's corpse. Constantly having to replace dolls became a problem. Consequently, the corpses began to rot, and the smell was horrendous. Local newspapers had been alerted to the disappearances by this time, so the neighborhood he lived in was constantly on alert. Eventually, he resorted to sneaking into the closets of his victims and stealing them away in the middle of the night. His actions sparked further panic in the community, forcing him to move repeatedly to evade police. Many corpses in the later stages of decay were found in the river the next day, dresses and all. He continued this pattern of murder and relocation for almost 2 years before he was finally caught. A neighbor had complained about the pungent odor coming from his house. That discovery made me cautious and wary of him when I went back to work. Day in and day out, he did the same things: eat, sleep, talk, stare. I couldn't help feeling somewhat depressed by his tragic spiral, while at the same time feeling anger and hatred toward a human being who could do something so morbid. The scariest part was that he didn't know what he'd done was wrong. He was still trying to make his dead daughter happy. I became paranoid. I told myself he would never be discharged, but that didn't stop me from checking on my daughter every single day and night. Every day, I saw his smiling face, talking under his breath in that soft, wispy voice. I was relieved and considerably more tense all at once. I was then assigned to a different ward, and my mind settled. The days wore on, and soon I forgot all about him. But the day came when he was discharged. I found out only a few days afterward, while on a night shift, by overhearing the other staff. A sudden, violent wave of nausea descended on me, and the room spun in slow, surreal circles around me. I ran out of the hospital, completely forgetting everything. I raced home, the speed limit the last thing on my mind. I fumbled with the keys, my pulse quickening, my heartbeat becoming a deafening drum in my head. She has to be okay. She has to be. That one thought filled my mind. I called out to her from the door and felt my heart drop into my stomach. Running to her room, I threw the door open and saw her form, covered in blankets, already sleeping. I sighed loudly in relief. The sheer terror that had taken hold of me turned into a mental laugh at my own ridiculousness. I smiled as I approached her bed and gently rolled her over. Her glassy eyes stared back up at me, her mouth stitched up and smiling. The last thing I remember was seeing those wet eyes staring directly at me from the corner of the room, before everything turned black